Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, January 18th of 2022, and I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Pretty quiet day.
Yeah, just a very chill, low-key, low-energy day in gaming discourse, I think, today.
Definitely did not wake up to some kind of earth-shattering news from you in my inbox.
Yeah, it wasn't like there was some sort of $68 billion acquisition being announced today. Yes, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard had some big news that woke up everyone on the West Coast out there this morning with the news that Microsoft is acquiring Activision Blizzard for a $68.7 billion sum. We'll start right out the gate, I think, with that, Trevor. What were kind of your initial reactions as you got the message from me, and then I'm sure opened up Twitter and were just flooded with everything from there?
Yeah, I mean, literally, I woke up, grabbed my phone, skimmed through it, saw a notification from you, and it was you tweeting me, like, Greg's tweet, that was basically just the, like, Xbox buying Activision Blizzard graphic or whatever. So I was like, half asleep, I was like, what is like digging through other Twitter things to find out like what was actually happening there. And then starting to see kind of, the all of the responses and stuff. All of the immediate hot takes, all of the immediate speculation, which like for, a good couple of seconds, I was like, oh yeah, what is this all gonna be? And then I was like, wait, this is just the Bethesda thing all over again. So we're not actually going to know shit until the deal goes through because it is highly illegal for those two companies to actually coordinate and make any of those plans until after the deal is finalized. So anything that's out there right now about, what's the future of Bobby Kotick and what is this going to mean for exclusivity and all that stuff is all purely speculative, just like it was back in the Bethesda days. But it was definitely like I will obviously the top story that we were going to lead off with this week anyway was going to be Activision Blizzard related because like we were talking yesterday about we'll tackle the story with the fact that workers have been striking for 7 weeks on the Activision Blizzard side of things. And so the fact that they instead come in this completely new light today with everything going on. I mean, from a consumer standpoint, I'm disappointed that and angry that Kotick and all the bad actors are going to get like a massive payday. Even if they're then immediately pushed out the door, that still sucks. And that's incredibly annoying. And it's incredibly annoying that Phil Spencer and Xbox, who I think are making like a lot of great decisions in gaming, are helping facilitate that. That's very frustrating. But then on the flip side, I'm hopeful that, that Xbox has the potential to actively take a hands-on role in that culture and make the changes that are needed. That said, they don't have a history of necessarily doing that. They largely in a lot of their acquisitions so far have been more hands-off and is just kind of like consolidating HR resources and stuff like that and kind of letting studios continue operating as they had been. So it's definitely going to be an interesting couple of years in the gaming space, and beyond that, I don't ultimately care where their games go because I think, as we've talked about before, I don't really play a lot of Activision Blizzard games these days. Like Call of Duty's not really my wheelhouse. Like most Blizzard things aren't things I've been playing in recent years. So I don't particularly care if those games end up going exclusive for myself. But I will agree with some of the other takes that I've seen of, this level of consolidation not going to be great in the long run. It's just kind of leading us down that path of there being, 5 parent companies over everything in the world. Your Amazon, your Disney, your Microsoft, and your maybe a couple others. So yeah, it's gonna be wild. I think those are pretty much my initial takes, and then I largely kind of was heads down and mostly focused on like getting back to work today. So didn't have a ton of time to really like dig in and kind of see the evolution of the story as the day went on. And like I said, I don't like realistically, there's not going to be significant evolution of this story for quite some time because everything is just going to be like, we don't have anything really to confirm at this moment because they can't for SEC trading guidelines and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I saw the news and the wave of reactions and takes and opinions and discourse TM, and I mean it is an incredible, like a $68 billion purchase is obviously an incredible amount of money to spend on anything. I think for me, the consolidation aspect of it is a really interesting angle, right? And Jeff Grubb had a really great tweet. I thought had a few great tweets, but one in particular was, consolidation isn't great, but the alternative wasn't working either. Activision was slowly disintegrating and making fewer games than ever. I don't know. Maybe there are issues with their overarching economic system. And like
the whole like, hey, maybe capitalism is bad.
Yeah, right. And I think there's some sort of truth to that, right? Like Activision has just kind of been, like you said, disintegrating and making fewer and fewer things. And the things they're making aren't necessarily, changing up the game. And I think then on top of all of those kind of underlying issues, you add on top of it the history and years worth of, sexual harassment and abuse and all these other kind of allegations and stories coming out of Activision Blizzard seemingly daily, and the strikes, and they're just in what felt like an increasingly untenable situation where something had to give. Do I wish that, the people in charge of Activision Blizzard weren't going to get golden parachutes? Yeah, but I'm also, I won't hide my glee at the fact that I think most of them are also going to, like you said, get pushed out the door pretty much the day this thing is done, with Bobby right at the top of that list. I will say to Phil Spencer's credit, the image tweeted out of like the leadership team going forward is exactly what, I love to see in terms of, I think, diversity and kind of inclusive face of gaming, right? And so that is super encouraging to see. That's super exciting to see. That's exactly what I want from my gaming companies kind of represent, the actual face of the people who play games and make games. And I trust in Phil Spencer's ability to, create a culture and foster a culture that is far, above and beyond what Activision Blizzard appeared to have had the last few years. For me, this is most interesting if this deal goes through, we should say, because obviously it'll almost certainly get put under antitrust a microscope. But if it does, it's interesting because of this is Microsoft coming so hard repeatedly at PlayStation now. First with Bethesda and now with this huge deal. These are things that I think can make a real tangible difference in terms of like the console sales race and numbers, right? Bethesda is one thing in terms of marquee games, but Activision Blizzard is something else entirely, right? And whether or not Call of Duty is going to go exclusive, I feel like is both something that has been talked about a lot today and also somehow not enough, because as much fatigue and exhaustion as I think a lot of the people who write and talk about games have about Call of Duty, these games still sell tens of millions of copies every year, and it is still a hugely successful franchise. What this means for Warzone going forward, right? What this means for the Call of Duty series as a whole going forward. I think there is obviously nothing nailed down, but this is such a huge potential ace in the hole for Microsoft. And that's before you even get to all of the other games that are involved in this purchase, whether it's Overwatch, whether it's Diablo, whether it's World of Warcraft, whether it's, StarCraft, etc. Like, there are so many things in that portfolio, and I think, ultimately, I still think Sony is going to sell more units this generation than Microsoft, but I no longer think it is necessarily a question of who's going to sell more, and more of whether or not it becomes a thing of like owning an Xbox is also sort of a necessary purchase if you play games alongside owning a PlayStation. And we are actually creating two distinct ecosystems that increasingly don't really mix. And so to play half of the great video games out there, you need the other console. And I think the ability for people like me to exist largely off of one console is getting a little tricky. Like, they're just Microsoft games. I'm like, I really want to play these games, and I now have increasingly no alternative other than to either own an Xbox or own a PC. So own an Xbox. Right. And so I find that really interesting, right? I think what Phil Spencer has done at Microsoft is like, it's weird. I think what he's done at Microsoft is both like, it is somehow underappreciated the change he's made at that company on the gaming side of things from where they were at and what, like 2015, we'll say, to pick a date, right? 2016 to now, right? Like, even if they're not selling as many units, like, it is a complete culture change, and it feels like they have so much momentum behind them and so much goodwill, and it feels like they're just making right move after right move after right move. And so those were sort of my initial takeaways while watching everything kind of unfold today.
Yeah. That said, we've talked about before how they make all the right moves, and yet still Sony sells more units or whatever. They're like, Sony's gaming business seems to still be doing better. Now, this obviously, especially with the kinds of games in that suite, your Call of Duties, your Overwatches and stuff, those continue to be the kinds of games that Xbox wants to put in Game Pass, that are kind of the ongoing games that you will keep that subscription going, rather than, you get the subscription to play through the entirety of one game and then bounce off. Like, they want you in there the whole time. They want you not letting the Game Pass lapse. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Just as a like a wider thing, the other like item of kind of note is, like, the gaming division is still not the bread and butter of Microsoft as a company as a whole. And so it's interesting that even with this landmark announcement, Microsoft stock dipped $7.55 today, which is amounts to about 2.4%, whereas Activision's shot up $16.92, which is like a 25.88% bump on this news. So it's like, from the like financial analysis, business, corporate America side of things, this is certainly on its face, a much better deal for Activision shareholders than it is for Microsoft shareholders. But the stock market also is solely looking at like short-term gains right there. Exactly. So the long-term strategy that Xbox seems to be playing is not going to be reflected in that regard. The other like fascinating elements, we talked about this, I think, a little bit. Maybe we talked about this when we were, I feel like we talked about it at some point, like in the hotel room or something, but maybe I'm just like plugging conversations from other times in my head. But the idea of like the size of this deal compared to other deals we've seen in the past.
Mm.
You know, we've talked recently about the fact that Disney bought Star Wars for $4 billion, and Marvel for about the same. Microsoft bought Minecraft for $2.5 billion all those years ago now. And then just, obviously last year, 2 years ago, they bought Bethesda for $7.5 billion. So this one shooting up to nearly $70 billion is just wild in the scope of deals that these are going to be and will continue to be. I imagine it's if somebody suddenly decides, hey, let's pick up EA or something like that, the size of what that deal is going to look like.
Yeah.
It's just going to be it's just going to keep going up. Or we'll see some weird bubble burst. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Financially, there's just those weird elements as well that are all playing into this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up, right? In terms of whether or not this is a bubble that is going to have to burst at some point in time. I mean, obviously, it can't keep increasing forever, and there are just companies that just you assume aren't going to get bought, right? Like, I don't know if I ever envisioned a day where EA gets purchased by one of the other carriers. Pushed because I don't know if they want to. And so it's really interesting to think about kind of speculating about where the next domino is from here, or if this is the last of them. And again, so much of this conversation also hinges on the fact of like whether or not the deal goes through, and whether or not they're able to actually get it finalized and approved. And yeah, I mean, turn into like the antitrust consolidation side of things, it is obviously a massive merger. And there were a lot of takes flying around on this particular point, maybe more than anything else I saw on the timeline today, that pretty much couldn't seem to agree on anything. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think historically the government is typically prone to not intervene if it can avoid intervening in kind of business mergers and acquisitions, which leads me to speculate that there won't be an antitrust kind of block against this. But, it is certainly possible because it is a $68 billion purchase and it's a huge ramifications on that. I think for me, that is sort of the element in some ways I find most interesting is what the kind of Fed's responses will be, what kind of the like SEC and, these kind of acronym laced government organizations are going to think once they start looking into things and investigating things like they, will have to, and if they'll allow it to stand or not. And then on top of that is this idea of like, as a secondary point, what this does in terms of easing off a lot of the pressure on Bobby and the Activision Blizzard board, right? In terms of the pressure to make them stand down, the pressure to make them leave. I wonder if this is in some ways a release valve to take off a lot of that steam and take off a lot of that pressure, because they'll be gone in a year. They'll be gone in a year and a half anyway. What's it matter? They'll be gone soon enough once it's finished anyway. Which, like you kind of alluded to, is unfortunate because you can still do a lot in a year and a half, or not a lot, and there's still damage that can be done from these workplaces and the toxicity of them, especially with these individuals in charge. And so, yeah, I'm not sure. It's a really complicated one, and there's a lot of moving plates, and so much of this is going to, by necessity, be a lot of speculation, and we won't really know anything for sure until pretty much the very end, including whether or not it goes through. But right now, that's immediately what I kind of thought when I was kind of running through all this stuff.
Yeah. Another element that I'm curious about on the like what is the future of Microsoft side look like is obviously all of this is going to bolster, again assuming the deal goes through, of course, bolster the Game Pass offering and the value of Game Pass.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
taking not only future games, regardless of if they're released on other platforms, but presumably they will do the exact same thing they did with Bethesda and take all of those old games in the backlog and put them in Game Pass and make them available to anybody with that subscription. And so it makes me wonder, how long do they keep that subscription at $14.99 a month versus continuing to or like, I guess basically the Game Pass has always been pitched kind of as the Netflix for gaming. How long until they start following the Netflix model, which has seen price increase after price increase after price increase in recent years? And you know, do they start doing it even in the Netflix model of, hey, if you want access to these games, you know, in their 4K form or something like that, here's one level, here's one tier. If you want just kind of the base level, especially, I guess, more so specifically for like the cloud streaming side of the Game Pass. But yeah, like how much this gives them ammunition to say, yeah, you know, this is worth $20 a month or $25 a month because of this massive suite of content you get with these games. And does that find an audience, or do they start kind of getting people saying, you know what, maybe I don't need to like, it's great that you have that, and maybe I'll hop in every now and then, but I'm instead going to start buying things a la carte, just because I don't want to spend X number of dollars per month when I'm not necessarily going to get that value out. It's going to be interesting to see really how that, because I mean, obviously the biggest defining factor really is like our time to play those games is limited. You know, it's the amount of time to put into a game is drastically different than the amount of time putting into a TV show or movie. So yeah, that's just another element that, especially like on the heels of Netflix, I think this last week raised their prices again, or is in the process of raising their prices again. So that is just another thing that is kind of in the back of my mind as they start to do this, especially if that rumored PlayStation subscription service thing, you know, ends up coming out. What does that era of competition on that front look like? Right now, Xbox is doing their own thing, and Game Pass can kind of be its own thing, and PlayStation
do whatever it wants,
can do, you know, the big budget first party titles that move those consoles and get enough people buying the console to get the third party games to kind of support when there are dips in production season or whatever. So yeah, it's going to be, you know, again, a fascinating couple years ahead of us. I don't know, like, ultimately at the end of the day, doesn't really affect me one way or the other because I have both consoles. I have access to both, and I already subscribe to Game Pass because I do find enough value in there, even though I still predominantly play on PlayStation. But it's going to be interesting to see, you know, how many more people start jumping on that. Or, I mean, because you mentioned like, yeah, you either need a console, or a lot of those people, like a lot of PC gamers, can just start doing, especially with all of these games in these slates, like the PC gamers out there might just say, hey, I don't need to buy those games individually anymore. I can just subscribe to Game Pass and get all of these games that I would play. Get the Overwatch, get your Call of Duty, get Warcraft. It'll be fascinating to see kind of how that shifts. And it supports the idea that Xbox has kind of been out there saying of like, we don't really care, like we still provide the console for those people that want it, but like we don't really care where people play. If they want to play on Xbox or if they want to play on a PC, we're going to try and meet them where they are. And Game Pass certainly will continue to do that for them.
Yep, those are all really great points. Those are really great points. I think the last thing for me is, like you kind of alluded to, this idea in terms of Game Pass becoming a Netflix subscription model. I think definitely you're going to start seeing eventually, whether it's this year or next year, you know, 2 or 3 years in line, them adopt a, probably like yearly increase or bi-yearly increase in the price of it. Especially if Sony doesn't have a Game Pass equivalent launched by this year, next year, right? Like, there's no competition for them to not do that, and it is such a great deal and such a great, bargain, with such a giant plethora of games, that I think it makes so much sense because they did just spend $67 billion on this thing, so they'd like to recoup that somehow. And most people just let those stuff auto go, right? And that's the thing too. Like, and companies understand that basic part of this too, is that like the vast majority of people just forget they even have it still necessarily, or using it, or how much it costs, or they just think it's the same price it was in 2018 when they first got Netflix or whatever.
Yeah. One thing I'll throw out on that note, that I think often gets overlooked because we don't typically focus on this segment of the market, but in this deal, Activision Blizzard and King, meaning, Microsoft is now going to have Candy Crush, just like when Activision paid billions of dollars for King. I think people like forget the value of that, because those games, are raking in millions and millions and millions of dollars as well, on mobile. And again, much like I kind of made the case, and discussed, like, Activision buying King not only gave them Candy Crush, but it also gave them like the foothold in the mobile market that they have since gone on and used with like Call of Duty Mobile and stuff like that. So the idea of Xbox taking more and more of their properties into the mobile space, they've done, they've started dabbling with that here and there, and just like continuing to really hone in on those again, and meet gamers where they are, or meet people where they are, even if they don't necessarily identify themselves as gamers. If they're somebody who's interested in playing 15-minute phone games or something like that, and will put some money into that, that's money that Microsoft doesn't want to leave on the table. So that's another, I think, aspect of this that, just because of the circles we run in, probably will get overlooked a lot, I think, in the years to come.
That's a really great point.
I think it is a very valuable and constantly growing market as more and more people get phones and get comfortable with, gaming on their phones.
I think it's also something to kind of tie into that, where, like you said, people who don't consider themselves gamers, and people who, don't consider a like $1.99 purchase of like an in-game thing, that's just a whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like, who cares? That's $1.99, no biggie. And then the thing is, like, those $1.99 purchases, or like $2.99, or even like $4.99 purchases, those add up quickly, right? And that's before we would get to like the whales of mobile apps who, are disproportionately responsible for so much of those games' revenues, who will just spend so much money on this stuff. And they're just these kind of silent killer, buckets of cash for King, and then Activision, and soon to be Microsoft, in terms of just raking in lots of money, sort of away from the microscope of the games media, in a lot of ways. It's a really great point, I think, to bring up. Trevor, any final thoughts on the Activision Blizzard Microsoft news today here?
The last thing I want to maybe kind of just bring up is, we talked about, I think I don't remember if we talked about it on the actual predictions episode for this year, or if we just kind of talked about it as like this might have been like another, prediction we could have discussed or something, but was the idea that we had that small studio, not too long ago, I don't remember who it was already, but that unionized and became the first video game union in North America. And we talked about the idea that with all of the movement behind ABK, or better ABK, the Activision Blizzard union, or Activision Blizzard King union that's kind of trying to start to form, whether or not like we would actually see, that cemented, and them actually kind of get enough power together to unionize. I think this has a potential significant blow to that is highly unfortunate, but they've admittedly already come out and said, like, we're still going to strive to, work to better conditions, whether it's Bobby Kotick, at the helm, or Phil Spencer. We're still going to be speaking to these issues. And the fact that this, I believe the deal wouldn't be set to go through until like next year anyway, right?
June of 2023.
June of 2023, the end of that fiscal year.
Yeah.
So I don't know if enough movement can be made in that year and a half to actually get those unions kind of formed and set up and established within Activision Blizzard. But I hope that this doesn't kill that. I hope that that fire and that momentum continues pushing forward, so that 100%. The workers can get a better seat at the table, regardless of who's at the head of that table.
I couldn't have said it better myself, right? Their strength in numbers, and I think they have a solid and growing group of people that are demanding these changes and that are supporting them from the outside. And so 100%, whether or not it is a union or just this collective of, workers striving to create better workplace conditions and make sure that they are, paid well and have benefits that they deserve. I fully hope and expect them to continue to push for the changes within Activision Blizzard, and then eventually Microsoft as well. That will do it here for this breaking news, lightning-packed episode of That News You Care About. Trevor's got a shout-out. Trevor, shout it out.
Yeah, I want to give a shout-out here. This is actually an article from a couple weeks ago, but just because of the obviously we took a week off there for Game of the Year stuff. So I wanted to give a shout-out to a Bloomberg article from January 3rd by Jason Schreier, titled "The Next Video Game from BioShock's Creator is in Development Hell." Yep. This was a deep dive that Jason Schreier did in the kind of struggles that Ken Levine's studio has been going on for recent years. Obviously, they had like a big kind of showing following BioShock Infinite, where they basically like completely downsized their studio and said, we're going to focus on smaller experiences. And that was a number of years ago. There's basically been no hide nor hair of it. So this was kind of Schreier doing what he does and kind of getting the inside scoop on the struggles that have been going on there. And unsurprisingly, I think, given kind of his reputation, Ken Levine is very much like the auteur, and is kind of not necessarily a great leader, great project manager.
Go figure.
And that seems to be causing significant struggles on this game.
It is a incredible piece of reporting and such a weird throwback of like, that's right, they've done nothing since Infinite. Reminder.
February 18th, 2014 is when they basically shuttered the old Irrational Games staff.
Next month. Yeah, it is incredible. I cannot believe that they have gone 8 years without doing anything. Yes, that is a great shout out. Everyone go check out that article. Otherwise, that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go over to your podcast service around the globe and subscribe to the feed, rate and review us on iTunes. Help bump it up. It really does help with the algorithms. Otherwise, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite. Like and subscribe to the videos over there. Ring the bell to get notified when a new video goes live. We've got all of our podcasts in video form, as well as all the different Let's Plays that we are doing. So go check out all of that. Otherwise, you can go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all of this podcast reviews, features going live over there. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trev, anything that you want to plug?
I'll give a shout out to our Game of the Year stuff.
Yeah.
We had a big old long Game of the Year podcast that is also now kind of available in written form. I went through and basically summed up the top 10 games of the year that we kind of settled on as a site. So you can go find that over at thatnerdysite.com, or you can listen to the full podcast where we go through each of our individual top 10s for the year and land on the site's top 10. So I will give that a shout out because I will leave the other thing that I can plug for you to shout out.
I will echo that shout out. It's a great thing. It was a great conversation. And I know that collectively, I think we're all also working on our top 10 personal Game of the Year pieces to go live as well. Trevor's going to have like 3 of them, I think. So go be excited for all those. Probably coming out next week as well. I will echo that shout out, and then also give a shout out to that D Plus show generally, but the episode that myself and Trevor did over the Book of Boba Fett, I thought was a really good conversation. And then tomorrow or 2 days from now, when you listen to this, Trevor and Cam will have an episode on Encanto. They'll have an episode on Eternals go live.
Encanto already went live. I've not heard back from Cam if he wants to do the Eternals one.
He said he's down. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So Encanto is already live with Trevor and Cam, and Eternals is going to go live 2 days from now when you listen to this. Time is really a flat circle when you're in Disney. So go check out all of that. And then you can also be sure to go check out that Bond show that me and Trevor have done. As you listen to this, the newest episode, Goldfinger, just went live, as well as the written review. It was a great movie, a great time talking about it with Trevor, and a pretty good review as well, I think. In addition to that, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet, and go find all the goodies over there. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games. Be good to each other.